It's a stunning increase. In about a year, the U.S. has seen a 95% jump in the number of illegal migrants crossing the border from Canada. This as a man was arrested in Quebec near the American border on terrorism charges. He allegedly tried to recruit undercover FBI officers in a plan to kill Jewish people in New York City. He told those officers, quote, "If we succeed, this would be the largest attack on U.S. soil since 9/11. Dr. Keith Kozin is a professor of Homeland Security in New York and a former Department of Homeland Security officer. He joins us now. Keith, thanks so much for making time for us today.
Thank you for having us, Mercedes. Having me, Mercedes.
A 95% increase is astounding, and this has historically not been a big problem. That the illegal migration Americans have been concerned about has been from the southern border, which continues to be a huge issue. What do you attribute this sudden spike in of migrants entering the U.S. from Canada?
I think part of it is a opportunity. With the issues we're having at the southern border, that is where primarily U.S. border officials are putting their focus, is the large number of people who are crossing the southern border into the United States. 15,000 people entering the United States from Canada sounds like a lot, but when you compare that to the 12 million that have crossed the southern border since fiscal year 2021, it really is just a drop in the bucket. The U.S. authorities are constantly sending officers and other personnel from all around the country to the southern border, but they're not giving that same priority to the border between the United States and Canada.
The fear in Canada is always that there will one day be a terror attack in the U.S. carried out by someone who's entered from Canada. And that fear is based on the relative size of our economies, the deep financial need Canada has to be able to access the U.S. border quickly and easily for goods and people. And here was sort of the worst fear almost realized. Is this going to create larger issues for Canada in the United States based on perceptions of potential vulnerabilities in our immigration system? Or do you think this is likely to be seen as a one-off that's not indicative of a larger problem?
Well, I think a lot of that's going to depend on how this particular issue and this particular arrest is politicized. A lot of focus was placed on the perceived weaknesses of Canada's immigration system in the aftermath of 9/11, looking back at the case of Ahmed Rassam, and you saw right away what closing up the border, the impact it had on both our economies immediately. But I think what there really need to be, from a practical sense, is increased cooperation between the United States and Canada when it comes to a variety of cross-border issues, whether it be, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and in this case, human smuggling, and to a lesser extent, human trafficking into the United States. The United States and Canada have a long history of cooperation on cross-border issues, going back to the 80s and 90s with the drug trade. After 9/11, we saw many initiatives and bilateral agreements between the two countries, culminating in 2011 with the cross-border accord that was signed between Prime Minister Harper and President Obama. Unfortunately, I think over the past few years, we've seen less cooperation, but I think with 2021, with the Biden administration, Trudeau administrations reigniting the cross-border crime forum and other initiatives since then, and I think even the arrest of Mohammed Shahid Khan shows the importance of, number one, as intelligence being the first line of defense when it comes to issues with this, but also the need for cooperation by these two, both security partners, but also economic partners.
One of the concerns in Canada has been that we found out from American and international allies about terror threats to Canada, especially the big ones, typically from the FBI or MI5, MI6, French intelligence. Is that something that we should be concerned about, that our own authorities aren't picking that up, or is this indicative of a cooperation system between allies that's working?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there is some truth to the idea that screening at Canadian ports of entry are a little bit laxed when compared to the United States. I would say I'd emphasize airports of entry. But I think the idea is when you look at the amount of money that the United States and UK spend on their intelligence apparatus, and the fact that within the Five Eyes and other international partners, we are sharing this intelligence, could kind of be viewed as a success rather than a failure. The bottom line is he was detected way back in November, is my understanding, and here it is, we've just entered into September, and he was in fact apprehended before he was able to cross into the United States. So he's clearly on our radar for almost a full year.
Where do you believe the weaknesses are in the Canadian immigration system? You talked about airports, and I'm curious to know more about that.
Well, I mean, the ability to enter airports, perceived lack of security, specifically in the visa screening process. I understand Khan entered Canada initially back last year with a student visa, and this is someone who was on social media, has indicated certain signs of radicalization and support of ISIS. So, is that in itself a shortfall of the way that Canada is processing visas? And that, of course, would carry over to entering Canada at a port of entry.
How do you see this issue carrying out as the U.S. election is underway? Do you expect that it is going to become more politicized, or is there so much attention right now on the southern border and the number of people coming across there that maybe it's buying Canada a little bit of cover?
Honestly, I do think it's buying Canada a little bit of cover, actually quite a bit of cover. I mean, when you look at the rhetoric in the current political campaigns, it's almost primarily been focused solely on the southern border and the various transportation of migrants across the board to different urban centers around the United States, and what impact that has had on the local communities. Again, 15,000 is a lot of people, but when compared to 12 million, again, it's just a drop in the bucket. And I think that's where the focus is being shown. I think at one point recently, candidate Trump has mentioned the northern border as a security risk. But that may just, in my opinion, is just a political statement, rather actually looking at it as a hard priority, where again, in Canada, it's a much larger issue because of our trade relationship and on other economic issues as well.
Do you think there's a risk there for the trade relationship?
I think there would definitely be a risk if he was actually successful, or another individual who was residing in Canada and was able to come clandestinely across the border and actually carry out an attack, whether small or large. That would definitely be politicized and would carry a lot of attention. You even look at the case of Ahmed Rassam as a Millennium Bomber. Here in the United States, he really didn't receive much attention, if any, beyond a day or two, until after 9/11, and his true connection to Al Qaeda was known to the public.
Keith Causin, thank you so much for your time and your insight, both from the academic and practical perspectives. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.